Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome to Ren's room, welcome to my room. In this video I'm going to be answering some questions that were asked in the comments to my Ask an INFJ Part 2 video. Hence why this video is going to be called INFJ Answers Your Questions Part 2. So I got quite a few questions from different people there, and I'm going to try to do my best to answer them. I'll try to react to all the comments by chronological order, starting from the earliest one to do justice to the people who were first to ask a question. So without further ado, let me answer these questions or react to these comments. So the first one is by Sim Salabim, excuse my beautiful girlfriend, saying that she cannot wait for this and that she thinks lots of people would show up if I did a live Q&A. Well, I thank you for your support as usual. My love. I hope that's the first time that I do a live Q&A. Lots of people will show up. I think that perhaps I'll wait until I have a few more subscribers, but I definitely will do it at some point or other. But yeah, again, appreciate the support. Hosterius, who's a friend from the INFJs forum, infjs.com, recommend this forum, says that he will pad Ren's audience, clap on cue, and laugh at all the punchlines. I appreciate your planned involvement, Hosterius. I think this is an excellent idea. Now, first proper question is by Jill Gibbs. Hi, Jill. Asking, hi, Ren, could you type Sade and Eva Cassidy? Fun fact for you, that has nothing to do with Sade, or should I say Shade? Like, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce Sade's name. I'm just going to say Sade because, because I just don't know. I'm assuming perhaps the pronunciation is different. One of the funniest things apparently I ever said in Ireland when I was living there was, there's lots of pubs called Cassidy in Ireland, and well, at least quite a few in Dublin, and at the time, I guess I hadn't lived in Ireland for that long, or I just didn't know how to pronounce it. And I said to one of my friends, oh yeah, I think the others are having a pint in Cassidy's. And he just laughed so hard, just as if, I'd pronounced it like as if it were like an Italian name or something, Cassidy's. So, but I know it's Cassidy now. Anyway, so for Sade, first of all, I gotta say, I am assuming that you're referring to the singer and not to the writer, the Marquis de Sade, who I believe is an ESTP, and I could go into some detail as regards why I think he's an ESTP, an incredibly pathological one, actually. But my brother is reading a lot of the Sade's writings at the moment, and it is so extreme and shocking. Like, people nowadays, so 300 years later, nearly, or 250 years later, like they do not even reach a third of the extremity of Sade's writings. But nevertheless, that was not your question. So to be completely honest with you, I was not aware of the existence of Eva Cassidy, which makes it a bit more complicated for me to answer the question regarding her. And I looked, she has passed away, that's what I saw, at a tragically young age. I looked for interviews and I was not able to find interviews. If you have interviews to send my way, I'd happily look at interviews of her. So at the moment I am incompetent to give you my opinion on Eva Cassidy. Now, regarding Sade, I'm not very familiar with Sade's personality. I'm familiar with a bit of the music. I checked some interviews, and what I can say is that well, it's interesting because I checked the interviews, but I also checked what the current opinion was regarding Sade, and there's not a lot because I think she's quite a private person, and she says that much in one of her interviews. But I saw that there were some suggestions that she might be ISFJ. So what I would like to answer to that is that I don't think that she is ISFJ. I think that she uses FI rather than FE. I did not see a lot of FE used in Sade's interviews. I would assume that, like, I thought that she was not necessarily. She came across as a feeler, but not as a. She came across as an introvert, a feeler, and an FI user. So essentially, either INFP or ISFP. I would tend towards thinking she's more likely an ISFP because she seems to be quite grounded in the real world and more of an NI rather than an NE user. So I would say tentatively ISFP first aid, but I'm not sure. This is tentative. Okay, now we got another question there by a person whose name I can unfortunately not pronounce because the letters are in Cyrillic alphabet. So I don't know if this person is Russian or from another country that uses Cyrillic alphabet. In any case, thank you for your question, mysterious human being. And so this person is saying, whoa, wait for this. I find you a very wise person and I like listening to you, so thank you very much for the compliment. Maybe it's kind of a stupid question, but isn't typing personalities categorizing which does not match the reality? Like, did I just ask you? I don't even know how to explain it. Feels like typing people is something like trying to explain emotions which are unexplainable, because I think our mind catch and explain only material objects or generic names of feelings, but personality cannot be categorized. I want to know how to ask my own question. Also, I want to ask if teenagers mistype more often than adults. Does it mean that their personalities are more flexible, or do you have a personality for your entire life? Sorry for the typos. So don't worry about the typos. I think I got the gist of what you asked there. So I think you're asking two questions here. The first question that you're asking is, are personality models like MBTI or like Big Five or like Socionics, do they accurately capture a personality? Do they not leave out a lot of stuff that are more qualitative maybe and cannot really be captured by a model, such as emotions, feelings, and these things, but a plethora of other dimensions of personality? And then the other question that you're asking is whether teenagers are more likely to mistype. And well, there's a third question related to the second question, which is, does one's personality change over time? Okay, thank you for these great questions. Well, the first answer I want to give you is, so answer to the first question is, I think that personality models are only as adequate to explain the reality of a person's personality as they can be. So they can be effective at describing the certain dimensions of a person's personality, not the whole host of feelings. So for example, if you have two people who are very clearly INFP types, the fact that they're INFP, both of them, does not at all summarize their past experiences, what they've been through in life, how they coped with these issues, how their emotions are manifested, other than in a certain formal way that's facilitated by the model. So you're right to emphasize that a model does not capture the entirety of a person's being or personality, but you could say that it captures a certain facet of it. And I think that how much you value a particular personality model depends on how much you consider that the facet that it captures is representative of a genuine dimension of a person's personality. So what I like to say, how I like to distinguish between what a model like MBTI captures and what it does not capture, is to say that it tends to be quite good at, I think, at capturing the how of a person, but not quite the what of a person. So you could describe the how of a person, of how a particular person tends to relate to the world. And if you refer to the psychological functions and how they're captured in types, you could say, well, an INFP person will have a tendency towards a how that is oriented towards introverted feeling, extroverted intuition, introverted sensing, and extroverted thinking. The what of a person's being, the what of their social cultural context, the what of their language, the what of their economic background, the what of their life choices, the what of the kinds of emotional engagement they have with things, that's not captured. That's not captured by MBTI. I think it captures the how somewhat well, not the what. So that answers your question from my perspective. Now, the question about teenagers, I think that's most definitely yes. Teenagers are more likely to mistype, quite simply because they, well, maybe for a few reasons. First reason is that when you're a teenager, your personality is still very much in flux. You have not, even in terms of the MBTI parlance, not developed all your functions to the same extent. When you're a teenager, you're sort of developing, you're like, you have your dominant function, but you're developing your auxiliary function, and the tertiary is relatively undeveloped at that point, and even more so the inferior function. So you don't know yourself. You're not as much of yourself as you will be in the future, and you're still in flux, and you don't know yourself as much. On average, a teenager is less likely to know themselves than an adult, therefore more likely to mistype. Does it mean that their personality are more flexible? In a sense, yes, which is why a teenager is more likely to embrace, you can be a punk when you're a teenager and feel like very punk, and then you can also, a few months later, become more of a hipster type, or you can be politically like right-wing and then go left-wing, which I personally I think is better than the reverse. Yeah, I've been all sorts of things when I was a teenager, so I'd say my personality was more flexible in a way, and I think it tends to harden over time, which does not mean that it is completely hard. It remains flexible, but I do not think that it's as volatile as the personality of a teenager in a way. But in each case, there's always an anchor somewhere, of course. The change can never be complete, so you can orient yourself towards change from a particular standpoint. The standpoint remains here, and is probably solidified in the identity of the child also, which means that does one have their personality for their entire life? I think in a sense, yes, and where your personality is anchored is going to remain where it is, but where you direct it from there is definitely partly up to you. So if you combine the how and the what of a personality, I would say that both evolve through time, but the what is always more at your disposal as the how than the how. Not that the what is completely fluid, and neither is the how, but I would say that the how, which is captured by the MBTI model, is a little bit less fluid than the what, which is captured by your life choices as much as by where you come from. Sartre said, freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. And I think that's the what, but you still have the freedom to define it. The how, you can probably not have as much impact on. So in a sense, I'm an INFJ, and I do not think that I'm going to suddenly become another type in the future. I personally believe that your dominant function remains the same throughout your life. Otherwise, I think that kind of discredits the MBTI model, because if a dominant function is how you see the world, how can it change? How can you suddenly shift your precognitive relationship with the world? It doesn't make sense. Although I suppose they're called cognitive functions, so maybe they're not quite precognitive, but still, if that's the filter through which we see things, we cannot, in theory, our simple volition cannot impact how we see the world. Maybe in the case of big shocking events, trauma and these things, there can be a big impact there, but anyway, I hope this is a satisfying answer for you. Thanks again for your question. Now, Pope Ocelot, hi Mr. Pope Ocelot, nice to see you. Nice to see you here. Says, I don't know how fast it takes you to type someone, but it typically takes me about 30 minutes to 2 hours to type someone. I use C.F. Joseph's type grid method and back it up by verifying the functions, and then finally the placement of the functions in the ego. It can be a bit time consuming if I want to be extra careful not to mistype someone. Well, that's pretty impressive. I should definitely check out C.S. Joseph. I've seen him mentioned quite a few times in the comment sections to my videos. I have checked out some of his videos, but because he seems to have created his own little system, and some of his some of his vocabulary is his own, I'd have to sort of familiarize myself first with his vocabulary and his theoretical model. I know that some of the people have said that well, they question his model. So in order to sort of make my own mind about it, I'd have to delve into his stuff more, and I will do so at some point in the future, I promise. Personally, because I try to rely solely on the MBTI model and on the cognitive functions that kind of subtend it, and so I try to use my intuition and the MBTI model primarily. So I do not use the Dave Superpowers stuff or the CF Joseph stuff or any other additional tool that's been provided on top of MBTI. I try to remain as simple as possible and use my intuition. So honestly, I'll just use my intuition and say, okay, I can see use of this function in that, and that other way, and I try to back it up with evidence of function use, and then say, based on this tendency, I think that that person fits that type. But I do not think that people of different types, or let's say people of the same type, use the functions in the same way, or not even necessarily in the same order. So, for example, let's use the example of Jordan Peterson. Well, Jordan Peterson, if he's an ENFJ, maybe TI would not be his inferior function. Maybe SE would be more inferior than his TI, for instance. You might say, well, that means he's an INFJ, but it's like the functions, I think, are a very good tool for us to be able to theorize or to capture the tendencies toward a certain type. But I do not think types are set in stone with an absolute, function stack that has to be that. It probably mostly likely has to be dominant and auxiliary as they are defined in the MBTI model, but the rest tends to be a bit more volatile, I think. So I use my intuition modestly enough most of the time, and then backed up by evidence. I think I have a sharp enough eye, and I see through people, but maybe I'm just being a bit overrating myself. Agantir says, just started watching your videos, Ray is cute. Well, Ray is, for those who don't know, is the Abby that I have, the profile picture of the girl with blue hair. It's a great character from an equally great show, Evangelion, which I recommend to absolutely everyone. And I have probably mispronounced that name in English. In French, we say Evangelion, which is probably a horrible pronunciation, just as much. But what can you do? Pressed in a book. Hi man, good to see you. I'm saying hi man, but I don't know if you're a man, so apologies if you're not a man. You say, I'd be curious to know which fictional characters in any medium you think are INFJ, and what are your top 5 favorite novels and top 5 works of philosophy. I'm thinking you could probably make a whole video out of each of those topics too, but whatever you see fit. You're absolutely right, I could make a video on my top 5 favorite novels, top 5 works of philosophy, and fictional characters that I think are INFJ. But because you've asked a question here, I'll try to think quickly about fictional characters that I think are INFJ, and to answer your other questions. Maybe I'll start with favorite novels and favorite works of philosophy. It's hard for me to answer this just on the fly like this, because I'm kind of, I'm just looking at you guys' questions now, and trying to answer them as spontaneously as possible. So I don't have 5 favorite novels, and I don't have 5 favorite works of philosophy. What I have are works of philosophy that are favorites and novels that are favorites. So maybe I'll just list 5 that come to mind, and hopefully that will do. So as regards novels, I would say 5 favorites. Good question. So I probably list the novel Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. That would definitely be in my top 5. A recent novel that I read that I thought was absolutely excellent was Narcissus and Goldmund by Hermann Hesse. I read all of Dostoevsky's best known works and all of Hesse's best known works, and I really loved their books. They're both INFJ authors, which revealed something probably. And I would say that my favorite by Hesse is Narcissus and Goldmund, and my favorites by Dostoevsky is Crime and Punishment. Other books that I love The Crime, what's it called? As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. Incidentally, another INFJ author. I feel bad, but what can I do? What would be other favorite novels of mine? Let's see if I have like a really great French novel that I could recommend to you guys. There are lots of really good French novels. Well, I mean, at the moment I'm reading In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. It's like a huge novel divided into 7 volumes, and you could sort of see an individual volume as a novel. So I would recommend checking out. He's an INFP, and I recommend checking out Swan's Way by Marcel Proust for analysis of emotion. He's incredibly profound, and the relationship between emotion and sensation. It's a unique work. You never read anything like it. So I recommend checking this out. So I would say this is my number 4, and then then there's a few. Like I love James Joyce's Ulysses. It's a novel that I enjoy as much intellectually as I do viscerally. It's a very intellectual book, and I would argue that Joyce is also an INFJ. So James Joyce, Ulysses, I would recommend. Not an easy read, but yeah. There are lots of other examples I could have mentioned, works from like German literature or more works from French literature. But these are the first 5 that come to mind. As regards works of philosophy, I would say top 5 works of philosophy. So I would say for me personally, among my favorite works of philosophy, I would say Tractatus Logico Philosophicus by Wittgenstein. Philosophical Investigations by Wittgenstein. I would say The Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche. I would say Being and Time by Martin Heidegger. And I would say which one could I name? You see, for number 5, like proper works of philosophy, there could be just so many, because so many philosophers have influenced me. For number 5 spot, I'm gonna say, gotta be careful about that. For some reason, I seem to care. I think, in fairness for its influence on my thinking, I would have to mention Fear and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard. So that would be my number 5. Being and Time by Heidegger, Fear and Trembling by Soren Kierkegaard, Genealogy of Morals by Nietzsche, and then Philosophical Investigations by Wittgenstein, and Tractatus Logico Philosophicus by Wittgenstein. So these are perhaps the 5 most influential books on my own system. I'm probably forgetting some, like as honorable mentions, I could mention The Word is Will and Idea by Schopenhauer. I'm hesitant to include it in my top 5 because I have not read the whole thing. It's a hugely long thing. I've read lots of parts, but not the whole thing, so I kind of feel bad about mentioning it. But I could certainly have mentioned that. I didn't mention anything by Heraclitus, the ancient philosopher, who is potentially one of the most influential on my thinking, but he hasn't really a work of philosophy. It's only fragments, only aphorisms. But I definitely would want to give him an honorable mention, as well as the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, as well as basically all of Plato's dialogues. I've read them all, and I recommend that everybody reads them. So, and then some essays by Bertrand Russell. I would mention work by Deleuze and some postmodern people as well. So, but anyway, that's the crux of my answer for you. And then fictional characters that I think are INFJ. Well, good question. I think that if I were to return to Dostoevsky, the novels by Dostoevsky, I think you have quite a few INFJs in Dostoevsky. So I think that if, for example, let's say Crime and Punishment, I don't know if you guys have read it, but so Raskolnikov is most likely INTJ, but I would argue that Porphyry, the inspector or the police officer that eventually manages to, I don't know if I want to spoil it for you if you read the book. So Porphyry, he has some significant exchanges and an interesting relationship with Raskolnikov. I would say he's an INFJ, potentially ENFJ, but I would say more likely INFJ for his penetrating insight into personality. So I would say Porphyry from Crime and Punishment. In The Idiots, it's hard to tell whether Prince Mishkin is INFJ or INFP. He seems to have traits of both, so up for debate. In The Brothers Karamazov, there's a bit of debate regarding whether Alyosha is INFP or INFJ. I think there are two phases in Alyosha post. There's a significant event that happens that I'm not going to spoil for you guys, and his personality kind of evolves after that. I would say that before that he's more of an INFP, and after he tends to be an INFJ with INFP-ish traits or an INFP with INFJ-ish traits, but he definitely starts to use FE more in the second part, well, post that event. So yeah, that's for Dostoevsky. And then like INFJs in fiction. Like, good question. I would mention some if they came to mind, but right now I don't really know. I'm trying to think of TV shows. TV shows. If I manage to think of some more characters, I will get back to you. But at the moment, I cannot really think of any INFJ character. It's just not a question that I've dedicated a lot of time to. So, but I'm sure that some will come to mind, and when they do, I will answer you in more detail. I feel really bad because I still have two people there, and it's Jay the music maker and Deep Mind, and they have asked me a lot of questions, and I think that's amazing. But unfortunately, this video is already very long, and I do not want to rush my answers to those questions right now. So what I will do is tomorrow I'll record a part 2 to INFJ answers your questions, and that will be dedicated to answering the questions asked by Jay and by DeepMind, as well as any other potential questions that will come my way in the meantime. So when I say that I will do it tomorrow, I'm hoping that I will do it tomorrow. If not tomorrow, later this week, but most likely tomorrow. So in the meantime, I hope these answers have been satisfactory for you guys. Thank you so much again for asking me those questions, and we'll see in the future whether I continue to follow this format or whether I do more of a Q&A thing, live Q&A thing, if I manage to get over my fear that nobody will show up. But yeah, so stay tuned for the second part of INFJ Answers Your Questions tomorrow, most likely, otherwise later this week. Okay guys, well, have a lovely day. I don't know if the interview with my brother has already been released, or whether it will be released later today than when I release this video, because I haven't decided which one I want to release first, but we'll see. In the meantime, have a great day, and I will catch you soon. Alright, take care guys, bye.